Well, it's a very, very devastating defeat. Yes, you are right, Belle, in that it is substantially lower, clearly, than the historic one she suffered back in mid-January when she first had this vote on her withdrawal agreement. But be in no doubt, it was still the fourth biggest defeat in the history of this Parliament for any sitting government. And not just on any piece of legislation, but essentially the key piece of government legislation. This withdrawal agreement is why Theresa May gets up in the morning. It is why this Parliament is debating Brexit. And so in that essence, it is yet again another humiliation for the Prime Minister. But she stumbles on. Now, there was speculation that that number might have been in double digits, that somehow this withdrawal agreement could come back for a third time. And it was notable that she did manage to win over some of her own Conservative critics last night, with people like David Davis, the former Brexit secretary, and people like Nadine Dorries, who's been very vocal of Theresa May's premiership to date, actually backing her deal. But clearly it was not enough. And you look at some of the headlines in the British papers today, and that is reflected just how and what a difficult a day it was for Theresa May yesterday. The Times here in London saying, driven to despair, Britain in crisis as May's plan is crushed again. The Financial Times saying May loses control of Brexit after MPs throw out the revamped deal. We've got the I newspaper essentially saying out of control. The Telegraph, May clings on despite a second humiliating defeat. And possibly the Metro newspaper here in London summing up how everyone feels this morning, Belle, by saying, sorry, we haven't got a clue, in reference to what precisely happens next.
There's a real sense that Parliament has now taken control of this Brexit process. Just tell us a little bit more about what happens next. The the vote that we've got today in Parliament on that no deal.
Yeah, indeed. So, having said for years that no deal is better than a bad deal, the Prime Minister is essentially going to change government policy today by allowing her MPs to have a free vote on what the most crucial issue facing this country. A further sign, as you say, that Theresa May really has lost control, that she cannot even whip her own MPs to take a position on Brexit and no deal, because if she had have done, she would have seen mass ministerial resignations. Many within the government do not want to see Britain crash out of the European Union. So later today, MPs will vote in Parliament essentially to rule out a no-deal Brexit later on this month. Of course, it is only 16 days until the UK is legally meant to leave the European Union on March 29th, Belle. And in those circumstances, one of the questions, of course, will be asked is, what way will Theresa May vote? Will she also vote to leave with a deal or without a deal? I think given what she said last night in the comments that she wants to see an orderly exit, it is likely she will vote to rule out a no-deal exit. Now, in addition to that, on Thursday we're going to see further votes, which will again be difficult for Theresa May, because she is going to ask Parliament whether they want to extend Article 50. Again, something she said she is not in favour of. I think what is likely to happen is that Parliament is likely to rule out a no-deal Brexit today, and then tomorrow, Belle, now it is possible that they could decide not to extend Article 50 and you would end up with a chaotic 2 weeks of scrambling before Britain crashed out. But I think in reality, what we'll see on Thursday is MPs voting to extend the Brexit process and to extend Article 50, or at least to request from Brussels that they want that extension.
Now, Darren, in any normal times, a Prime Minister who'd suffered two enormous defeats in the Houses of Parliament would most likely have stepped down. How long can Theresa May keep going?
Well, this is the perennial question, isn't it? As you say, Belle, in normal political times, Theresa May would have left Downing Street a very long time ago. She is still there, in part because there is not a clear, obvious successor. The Conservative Party is riven by division when it comes to Brexit. They clearly cannot unite behind anyone else to take over. However, I do think it is getting to the stage now where things are getting very, very tricky for Theresa May. She is so closely wedded to this withdrawal agreement, to this strategy of hers, that she's in some ways a bit like that strategy, and the withdrawal agreement potentially reached the end of the road. It is interesting listening and talking to MPs here last night that, having privately talked about the fact that Theresa May need to leave Downing Street, many now are publicly stating that. The problem, of course, for the Conservative Party is there is no mechanism to get rid of her, Bell. They, of course, challenged her at the end of last year. She managed to win that vote. She cannot be challenged for another year. Her only chance of going would be if she were to resign. And yet, as we have seen time and time again, she is pretty resilient and doesn't seem like she is going to do that, at least anytime soon. She clearly has the ambition to remain inside number 10. Just one glimmer of hope, and there is one glimmer of hope for the Prime Minister in all of this, and indeed it must be said for her withdrawal agreement, is a sense that actually if we get to the end of next week, when there is an EU Council summit in Brussels, where Brussels may well agree to an extension which MPs will vote on tomorrow, but that extension will be for a prolonged period of time, that those Brexiteers, those Conservative MPs and Northern Irish MPs who have consistently voted against a deal may in the end decide that actually, despite how bad they think the deal is, they will ultimately back it. Because Brexit will then be put in peril. So that in the last week of March, despite everything, and despite the fact they do not like Theresa May or her deal, that they may in the end back it and her deal goes through. It is unlikely, but it is possible, and it is a strategy still being pursued by number 10 that we may well see a third vote on this withdrawal agreement. But I think, in all honesty, at this moment in time, the most likely scenario is that Britain is now facing an extension to the Brexit process, more uncertainty, and, as the newspaper's been pointing out this morning, a country in crisis with a Prime Minister not really in control and one facing a battle to save her premiership.